Hello, this is Danny Raymond, the voice behind Ray's Guide. CIG has teased the arrival of the Hull C this year, and it is likely that with it will come cargo emissions, since the supply-demand numbers of the current economy will not handle the introduction of something as large as the Hull C, particularly since the Hull C cannot land on planets, only at stations. This has brought me to some significant questions that I've been thinking about, and since these will lead to some long-term and big issues, this video is going to be part of my Road to 5.0 series. Also, to be clear, as with all the videos in this series, I am not speaking for CIG here. I am not saying specifically what will be in the game, but offering my take on what generally need to be made to make it all work right. Specifically, the issues that I've been thinking about are: first, what does the size and limitations of the Hull C restructure the entire model of how goods flow around the verse? Second, how do we do both the current trading gameplay and the new cargo mission gameplay working together in the context of a single dynamic economy in the living, breathing universe of Star Citizen and the actions of Tony Zurovic's Quanta economic system? And finally, how do you create a structure for cargo missions that both fits in the economy, does not require the hauler to buy the goods up front, and still gives haulers a reason not to just sell their cargo to pirates? So to start with, the Hull C has over 6 times the capacity of the Verse's current largest cargo ship, the Hercules C2. But at the same time, it can only land loaded at the Cloud City of Orison and at the 3 orbital space stations. There are other space stations that could handle them, but they are unlikely on their own to have sufficient supply and demand capacity to have more than an infrequent need for a Hull C-sized ship. So these are the 6 lanes of traffic that Hull Cs will travel. They will have massive capacity and high efficiency. They will have the kind of capacity that paying escorts will be far more feasible than in other craft. So how does that change how things work? Well, the real world and basic economics tells us clearly what will develop: a hub and spoke system. First, you have the spokes that connect the Lagrange point stations, which have high capacity but infrequent need. Then you have intermediate length spokes to the various moons and other planetary outposts, and then you have the very short, high volume spokes to the major landing zones like Area 18, Lorville, and New Babbage. So, likely dozens of cargo missions will exist from these spoke locations to the hub that once there, they will then be distributed and consolidated into larger missions that Hull C owners will take to fly between the hubs. And then each time one of these Hull Cs complete their trip to a hub, it will generate of dozens of smaller spoke missions on the spoke routes. This is great since it retains a niche for each type of craft, even after the Hull C is introduced. The hulls going between the hubs, the Starlifters and Caterpillars between the landing zones and the hubs, and Freelancers, Connies, and Star Runners and rafts to the smaller spoke routes. All cargo ships matter. But it changes the whole model of how cargo is thought of. Currently, the transport model is from point of production to point of consumption. But the hubs themselves neither produce nor consume much of anything. Instead, the transport model is point of production to point of distribution to point of consumption, and point of distribution to other points of distribution. It is almost as if you have to deal with 2 trade networks. Points of consumption and points of production trade with the point of distribution, and then the points of distribution trade with each other to maintain the inventory and prevent shortages. This even applies to parcels. Follow your FedEx, UPS, or Amazon packages, and you will see that they, too, all use a hub and spoke distribution system. So mostly our package delivery missions would be to pick up a bunch of packages and deliver them to the distribution center, pick up a bunch of packages from the distribution center, and take them to the destinations. Now, before a bunch of you start typing is, well, it's more complicated than that in reality, of course it's more complicated than that. All economic models are simplifications. If they weren't simplifications, then they wouldn't be models. They would be reality. Now, how would cargo missions be priced? Well, most freight hauling today is done by a simple formula of weight times distance. And my suggestion is that Star Citizen be slightly modified as volume times distance times an effort modifier as to whether you are going up or down to a location with gravity. That will keep the short spokes from becoming too uneconomical compared to the longer runs. Then I would also add times a value modifier, whose purpose I will get to later. Now notice that if we ever get these planets moving, as they should, the distance, and thus the payment for cargo missions, will be constantly changing. Not only that, but for Lagrange points 3, 4, and 5, The nearest cargo hub will occasionally switch from one to another, making the cargo picture change. This will make it more interesting week after week. My second question was how to make all this work with both commodity trading, which I strongly want to remain in the game, and with the new cargo missions, which are also necessary because some players want a simpler cargo gameplay and because the Quanta need a simple system in order for them to remain lightweight. But it's all one economy. Let's say Hurston Dynamics needs a fair quantity of titanium brought to Lorville every day in order to build their weapons. Now, do the people at Hurston Dynamics headquarters care if the titanium was delivered by a quantum completing a cargo mission, by players completing a cargo mission, by players trading titanium at places where it is cheap and delivering it directly there, or by player miners who extracted that titanium ore from rocks, brought it to be refined, and then brought it to Lorville? No, to them it's just titanium. Titanium is fungible. One ignite of it is just as good as any other. Now I'm going to divide everything into two broad categories. Yes, I know reality is more complicated, but we've already gone over that already. Commodities and products. Commodities are raw materials particularly distinguished by their fungibility. That's what makes them feasible to be bought and sold on speculative markets, because any unit produced of, say, titanium from any source is equally valuable to any buyer. Products, on the other hand, are something that you want, a specific thing. If you want an iPhone 14, you don't want a Samsung Galaxy or an Xbox, or vice versa. Now, when it comes to insurance and customs, though, they are bought and grouped together into a category, consumer electronics. So while the freight carrier might sound like they are carrying something generic, consumer electronics, the cargo itself is something very specific that the destination has requested from the source and not at all fungible as a commodity. In fact, depending on the degree of serial numbers and tracking measures, it might be very hard to sell a stolen one at all. Now, I'm further going to divide products into two categories, component products and finished products. The difference is that component products are mostly demanded by other sources of production, and finished products are mostly demanded by centers of consumption. For example, from our current list of trade goods, agricultural supplies is a component product, and processed foods are a finished product. At the start of each trading day, don't be put off by that term, the start of each production consumption node has their own trading day, and they're offset, so there's always fresh supplies becoming available. A place that produces or needs a commodity will publish how much, say, titanium is available or how much titanium it needs, and at what prices. This starts an open trade period, which point traders can grab contracts to either purchase some of the supply or some of the demand. Of course, the smart trader is going to balance their buy contracts and their sell contracts. The player then has to the end of the trading day to do the pickup and make the delivery in order not to have it be considered a failure. And they will operate probably mostly on a point-to-point basis. After the open trade period, a group of presumed NPCs, actually a server process called the Freight Consolidator, goes to work. They take all the remaining supply and demand and create missions to take the supply from the source of production to the distribution center, take all the demand from the distribution centers to their points of consumption, and if any distribution center has too much or too little of anything, big cargo missions between the hubs will be generated to equalize inventory, and those will be the mainstay of the Hull C ships. When the missions are generated, they are then made available to players for a limited time, say 30 minutes each, before being opened for the Quanta to take. The reason why the players get this exclusive early crack at the cargo missions is that without it, players will be seeing missions pop up only for a second before being taken by the Quanta, which would be highly frustrating. Now, at this point, I was considering getting into the actual prices for the commodities and goods and products, but that will have to wait for another discussion, as this one is running a bit long. So let me turn to the third question. How do you make it so that the players don't just turn around and sell the goods that they have been contracted to ship, either directly or pretending to surrender to a pirate? Now, some have suggested that the solution is that the cargo has no value. And while there might be examples of some cargoes that have no value, the system has to work for the entire dynamic economy, and most cargoes do have value. So what to do? Well, my answer is that there is cargo insurance. However, you don't buy the insurance. Why would you? The cargo for the mission isn't yours. Rather, the shipper buys the insurance because the cargo is theirs. But the insurance company, and although there may be more than one insurance company, they all share data regarding losses, divides the cargoes based on how expensive they are to replace. So perhaps consumer electronics might be category A, and agricultural products might be category D or E. And so will the insurance companies presumably be charging the shippers more to insure category A shipments, but they also require that category A insurance requires a category A captain. And how do you get to be a category A captain? Well, a long, unbroken string of no failures, of course. And of course, category A insurability captains carry a scarcity premium. That is the reason for the value modifier I talked about in relation to the reward for cargo emissions. Category A emissions pay more because Category A captains are scarcer, not because it's more difficult to actually transport expensive stuff versus cheap stuff. And that's why cargo captains won't sell their cargo to pirates and won't just immediately give up, because they want to keep that lucrative Category A rating. In fact, on a big ship like the Hull C, this difference between a Category A mission and a Category B mission, or between a Category B mission and a Category C mission, etc., should be big enough to be worth hiring escorts and convoys. And this whole thing I've talked about, the commodities, the managing of supply and demand, the creation of missions, and the taking of missions by player in Quanta, along with dynamic pricing that I'll be covering in the next discussion, all these together make for the dynamic economy. And the dynamic economy is a feature significant and broad enough that it being fully implemented could be a milepost worthy of a full version number, and thus, this is part of my road to 5.0. Now for an update on our two ship giveaways. The first is our 10,000 subscriber thank you for the LTI Hull C, the colossal cargo container carrying craft to be given away when the sea becomes pliable in the verse. And then there's the big ship giveaway for the winner's choice of either the Galaxy Complete, the massive modular mining moving medical machine, or the brand new big box bargain bazaar, the Merchantman. One entry per video for both of these contests. Just be a member and get it automatically, or subscribe and comment with the secret word. And the secret word for this video is the metal that I was using as an example of a commodity. Plus, we still have our Waiting for 3.18 piloting skills contest for the most amazing landing of a ship Hercules size or larger. See the video in the description for that. Fly safe, keep it real, and I'll see you in the verse. This is Danny Raymond for Ray's Guide.